Hi, everybody.
Hey,
Welcome
everybody.
to Detention, where you think about what you've done. We are really excited to be live today with the one and the only Bevan McKinnon. Chris is going to tell you a little bit about Bevan if you're not already familiar with him through one of his many triathlon lives, I guess, one of your many triathlon characters. But we are both
Yeah,
really excited to be seeing Bevan again. He is an extraordinary coach, and we're really excited to have you. So thanks for being here.
happy to be here.
Yeah, so for those of you out there who saw my Instagram post earlier today, Bevan McKinnon is one of my coach crushes. And
I think
he
both of our
is
coach
an
crushes.
Ironman University certified coach, a Triathlon New Zealand level 3 accredited coach, Bike New Zealand coach, and a qualified NetFit strength and conditioning coach. He has coached professional triathletes and amateur triathletes to multiple Ironman and 70.3 wins, the top of their age groups. He's been instrumental in helping a large number of people get to Kona, either professional or amateur, and coaches professional triathletes Jocelyn McCauley, Anneke Jenkins, and Hannah Wells, among others. Away from coaching, because we told you that Bevan has several triathlon lives, Bevan hosts the wildly popular Fitter Radio with Dr. Mickey Williden, a podcast that has, to date, recorded 335 episodes and counting. He and Mickey have interviewed dozens of legends of the sport and also helped explain the intricacies of endurance to countless listeners. Uh, but there's more. No slouch on the race course himself, Bevan posted his personal best Ironman distance race at the age of 45, clocking an 8:48 while setting the fastest ever age group time at Ironman New Zealand. Bevan McKinnon, welcome to Detention.
Hello, guys. How's it going? Well, lovely to see you again. Well, not so much in person, but just lovely to see you
Yeah,
again.
on the internet person.
On the internet,
And
yeah.
thank
I
you
haven't
for
moved in a year since I
right.
spoke to Chris last. My backdrop is exactly the same, which is the new world of being an online triathlon coach. Is that what we all are
I think
nowadays?
so. I
That's what
think
we are now.
so.
Yeah.
Where there's a laptop now, there was like a piece of like podcast recording equipment next to the
I,
microphone
I think that's
last
a
year.
printer.
Yeah. No, we invested in a new printer, and I thought I'd put it front and center because it showed that we're actually earning enough money to be able to afford a new
Oh
printer.
yeah,
So
it
so
sets the standard.
things are going swimmingly for us over here in New Zealand.
That's what we just did with our fax machine.
So speaking of New Zealand, do you guys have are you familiar with the concept of detention in New Zealand?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
you have it.
I spent a significant amount of my schooling life
Yes.
in detention. Yes,
Tell us
Okay.
more, Bevan. What did you go to detention for?
Yeah. What did you do?
a lack of enthusiasm for the curriculum, possibly more interested in what we call PE or physical education. Only wanted to get involved in sports and anything that had to do with sports, and so anything academic was like tolerated for a brief period of time, but once I was about 15, 16, the attendance was literally to stop me having to go and get a real job somewhere else. So yeah, very, very familiar with detention. In point of fact, I laughed when I saw that was the name of the show. Yeah, that's pretty good. I think we've all been in detention for globally for a period of time. So very, very apt.
So Chris and
Um,
I have both spent a lot of time in detention growing up as well, but most of our guests have never been.
are
Ah,
the rest of
right.
our goody two shoes guests like we get to that like introduction point and we're like, so what did you spend time in detention
They're
for?
like
And they're like,
nothing.
we were
Never.
never there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Most of the athletes I coach, possibly too studious. I think I coach. Someone asked me the other day. One of my athletes posted it, and she raised the question. She said, "How many people with doctorates or PhDs do you actually coach?" And I actually did a head count, and I coach four PhDs, two medical doctors, and one professor. And if you'd asked me when I was a teenager whether I would be working with people with that kind of academic chops, it never would have happened. So yeah, I'm more impressed with the people I work with, and I guarantee you, not one of those people would have spent any time in detention.
Do you think that that is an aspect of the sport, or do you think that there is something about like the way that you work that that attracts a certain type of athlete?
I definitely think it's a bit of both, really, because people are. I used to say I was a data focused coach, and I wouldn't describe myself as that nowadays. It's definitely a marriage of art and science. And as I've worked more and more with professional athletes, I've realised that the psychology of performance is equally as important as the physiology of performance. So I've realised that my skill set had to improve on that side of things. But most people come to me for the physiology. And if you're quite interested in the science, or you're an intellect or academic in some way, or just really a well-educated person, the science tends to intrigue people. And so yes, I think my coaching style has attracted that type of people. But then I also think that it's a predominantly middle class sport. So a lot of successful people that have spent their time in education, I think, are deep thinkers about the sport. So yeah, it's a little bit of both.
So I know a lot of folks have no trouble tracking down, the science literature on the science of training. How did you learn more about the psychology of training? Like, where did you get that information and develop that concept?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think if you'd asked me, I never wanted to necessarily saw myself as being a coach. It was just an evolution through different sort of roles that moved towards health and fitness, and then I sort of was always a rabid, self-educator in and around the sports science side of things. But I think I've always had just uh, if I was to describe what I think is one of my strengths is my ability to communicate and to take a difficult concept and make it understandable to the layperson. And so the people skills that you need to develop in order to be able to do that and be able to work with a wide range of people and a wide range of backgrounds and educations. I don't think I necessarily would say that I have any formal education in that space, but I've always been very aware of the individual, and when I work with them and try to find that particular angle that you need to do to deliver your message. And then so initially it was all about the delivery of the training message, but then this is a loop. That information comes back to you, and you've got to be able to listen to what people are saying to you as much as you deliver the message and they just nod their head and go yes. And then when I actually started to realize that a lot of performance is ultimately decided by what this tells you to do, that I had to get really good at understanding where the limitations sort of resided in terms of the psychology around performance. And then I think with the professional athletes more than ever, their physiology is separated by very, very small margins. But equally, one person can be more successful than another. And I always started to realize that it came down to maybe how their beliefs, how they dealt with pressure, how they dealt with stress, all those other things that are not as easily quantified. And so that's when I started to listen to what people were telling me a bit more, looking at the signs, and then realizing that if I could help put an arm around an athlete and convince them that they could take their physiology and the psychology and get the performance that they were after, then I'd have the best of both worlds. So it really is just self-taught as such, but you guys will know, so often are we undermined by this when this was ready to go. So I think everyone becomes a bit of an amateur psychologist if they evolve as a coach anyway.
What are some of those signs that you just referred to that you look for in an athlete, whether good or bad, in terms of their psychology?
I think, yeah, you're right. Look, the sport it definitely attracts A-type personalities. And I think we were talking off air beforehand. It's about aligning ambition and ability. We have a very well-known commentator on triathlon and endurance sports down here in New Zealand. One of his cliches is that people very often don't align well their ambition with their ability. And so you've just got to make sure that you when an athlete comes to this sport, and depending on what their goals and their outcomes are, even if they're professional, you've just got to look at what are some of the things that either are blocking their pathway to optimizing their fitness. And so that we all know about performance anxiety. That's one of the more acute psychological barriers that we encounter on race day. But then we also have all these other extraneous pressures that exist in our environment, in our holistic environment that wraps around us when we're just trying to train. So we have our nutritional stresses, environmental stresses, work stresses, relationship stresses, all those kinds of stresses. But I'm 49 years of age. It's not like I haven't encountered all of those myself. And I've been an athlete as well. So you just got to sort of say to yourself, okay, what are some of the things that you personally experienced? And then do you see these things crop up regularly? Are there some traits that people display? It's how they're dealing with work, how they're reacting to training. We have a subjective analysis that we use rather than just relying on training peaks and the data to tell us how people are tracking. We get them to talk to us about their mood, their sleep, work stresses, general levels of grumpiness, all these other sort of extraneous stresses that do ultimately influence whether we get better or not. And so it's just a matter of just sort of condensing those into a little bit of a template questionnaire, but also just, I think I've been doing this probably seriously for at least 15 plus years now. There are some fairly common themes that crop up with different athletes, and I'm sure the athletes listening in may know about them. We all talk about them. You as coaches will know them as well. We typically have the same stresses in our lives. Not many people are significantly different from athlete to athlete because that's the sport. We're triathletes. We all have, majority of us have busy lives, busy jobs, stress, and we're in a stressful phase at this stage globally as well. Look, there's nothing that's significantly different from Southern Hemisphere athletes to Northern Hemisphere athletes, but if you can step back and make sure that you're objective enough to be watching from the outside and not part of it, then I think you can see it with a little bit more clarity.
So speaking of being mentally resilient, this has been a tough year, and a lot of folks have had some real ups and downs, and for a lot of us, it's been something that has forced us to kind of take a step back and reassess. Chris and I were fortunate enough to invent this amazing platform here, the Endurance School.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how 2020 has impacted you and your how you're moving forward from here?
It's a little bit different for the pros to the age group athletes. Over the years, I've coached quite a number of pros now, which is an extreme privilege, I think, as a coach. Something that I didn't really, necessarily start off thinking that that's where I wanted to end up. But it's the nature of the beast. If you do well as a coach, you'll end up working with better and better athletes, I think. So if I talk about the pros first and foremost, it is hard, and I think the reality is that some of the pros that I work with, say for example, a young female athlete, Hannah Wells, last year she won, I think every half Ironman in the in Australasia. She ran 7 or 8 70.3s in challenge races and a marathon. And her last race was 70.3 Geelong, and she won that. And we're on the cusp of a domestic home 70.3 world champs and trying to qualify for Kona and doing an Asia Pacific Regional Championship Ironman, and to have that bubble punctured, as it was, you can expect a really big drop in mood and, as a young athlete, that's something that you really have to consider. But we try to look at the bigger picture there. It's the way I framed it for the pros was we just have a longer off season, and in off season, that's where the major gains are really ever made for athletes, whether they're age group or pros. So we talked about just putting in some mini goals, and even not being a triathlete anymore. I mean, ultimately we're swim, bike runners, so find something that you can direct that competitive drive to. And it wasn't easy. Look, it's all theory by saying that, but I can't put myself ultimately in their shoes to know how disappointing it was to have 2020 taken from them, but they've bounced back and they've listened to the advice, and they can see the bigger picture because they are in it for the long term. And then with the age group athletes, I think essentially the same thing. And we spoke offline before we came on here, and we talked about falling in love with the process of training. And I think that's something that I reiterated to our athletes that we work with in the age group ranks is most really, really successful athletes in any sport, and I think it was a quote that I took from Ryan Bolton. It was, now I think what Heather actually put this quote up, and he said the difference between some of the best athletes in the world and some that don't actually make it is that they just live for the shit. That if I could ride my bike 5 hours a day for the rest of my life, and someone said you'll never race again, then I'll ride my bike for 5 hours a day. And I think I used that quote to a number of athletes and said basically, this is a test of who you are as an athlete. If you don't love the process, then you're going to struggle to reach the highest level of performance. So we talked about the process, and we talked about the sheer joy of swim, bike, running, and falling in love with that if you weren't, or learning ways to fall in love with it. And so the process became a really big focus for the age group athletes.
So kind of turning that around on yourself. So yeah, it is all just swim, bike, run. But you're not just a triathlon coach, you're also a podcast host and all this other stuff. Has this period afforded you the chance to do anything new, try anything different, get in a different sport, anything like that?
Definitely. You must have heard. I've been gymming it. I'm strength and conditioning. That's all I'm into at the moment.
You lift, bro?
You're getting swole.
I'm getting swole as the
You're
goal,
swole.
size as the prize.
I thought you were looking swole.
Swole as, I was never the smallest. Like I always say to people, so in New Zealand, when you crash your car, we take it to something that's called a panel beater. So they repair cars, and so I always said to people that I had to take my rugby size frame, so like the All Blacks here in New Zealand. I was really truly destined to be a rugby player, but I had to panel beat my body down into being a triathlete, and the lightest I ever was probably, I don't know in pounds, but I was probably about 81, 82 kgs as a triathlete. So I'm not as tall as Chris, but I definitely, if I look at a weight in the gym, then all of a sudden I get stronger. And I just think that for me, and I think masters athletes in general, that strength training is a hugely beneficial addition to your training. So I jumped in the gym, and all of a sudden I found a love for strength and conditioning that I haven't had in the past, because at the end of the day, when I talk about the process, the thing that I used to make that I felt made me a good athlete, I never was someone who just had to race all the time. I could train an entire 12 months, and if I didn't race, I didn't race, because I just love training. You took that away from me, then you'd be taking away everything. So I just need something to invest my energy into, and it became strength work. And I didn't intend on getting bigger, But then it started as, let's get rid of all these injuries, and then, actually, I quite like the look of and so then all of a sudden it became a little bit more, and then I think I had someone say to me the other day, you're looking a little bit buff at the moment, and I thought, okay, now it's time to, I still want to sort of semi-look like a triathlon coach, but I don't want to look like a bodybuilder, so I'm caught between two worlds at the moment, so I might just back off a little bit and get a few more runs and swims and bikes, and which I still do. So I mean, I would do, I don't know what you got. How much training do you guys get done a week? I probably
Personally?
average 12 to 14 hours.
Yeah, it's about that's where I am probably. Chris, you're a little north of there probably,
Just
depending
not
on.
much, though. Yeah.
You have a lot of long bike rides that you have to do for gravel racing.
Who doesn't?
More than like 12 or 14 hours though when I start bumping into like, when am I going to do working?
Well, the gravel bike thing has taken off big time everywhere. And so I recently bought a gravel bike, and whether that's to try to lose a bit of this muscle mass or whether it's just to get outdoors, I'm not too sure. So we'll see. We'll find out in a year's time if I catch up with you guys again.
You should talk to Jesse Kropelnicki about his distant past as a really I was wildly surprised to learn that in like the early 2000s, skinny Jesse Kropelnicki could deadlift 405 pounds.
Oh, wow.
That's
more than two Chris Baggs.
That's like a shade under 200 Ks.
Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of Jesse's real lens was placed on nutrition from bodybuilding and that macro management of calories, and so I know that that's where his engineering brain and the nutrition brain came together, and then obviously the core diet and everything that went with the QT2 system philosophy came out of. And I do remember about Jesse starting as a bodybuilder.
Yeah, he could really put him up. So, So next time we ever see you, I expect to get a do you even lift, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually just going to interview you in the gym.
Well, strength is hugely important. Someone said to me the other day, will you ever go back and compete again? And honestly, the desire to compete, like the last time I did Kona, it killed me. It nearly killed me. I think I lost 8 of my 9 lives in winning Kona. And that you can only go to the well so many times. And that effort, like truly, as Chris, my partner, said to me at the time, she said, I've never seen you like that. And I actually think it took something from me that I don't have the urgency to go and repeat again. Like I keep thinking to myself, maybe should I, because one of the things is if you win your age group in Kona, you automatically qualify for the next year. So I won my age group in Kona, I thought, sweet, I'll just go back to Kona again. I got about 2 months into training for it, and I went, no way, I'm never going back I'm only going to go back as a podcaster and a coach. So, I think you've got to find other passions and still keep yourself interested and stay healthy.
Yeah, I hear that. It just seems like at a certain point, like that competitive candle, something. It's not gone.
It's not. No. Like I think I'd end up like there's a local. Like as I look out my window here, I can see the sea. So we live 150 meters from a big beach here in the North Shore of Auckland, and there's a local swim series. See, I still swim 3 times a week. I would bike probably 4 or 5 times a week, and I'd run 4 times a week. So I've got something ready to go at any particular time. But I've always enjoyed open water. I always enjoyed the swim leg of a triathlon. I don't come from a swimming background, but I love the the tactical awareness that you've got to have to make the most of opportunities that exist within the a swim race. And for some reason, I've just always always enjoyed the swim for that reason. You've got to be aware, you've got to understand where the groups are going, what lines to take, how to sight, all that kind of stuff. So I think maybe this summer there is a sort of a desire to get involved in this weekly open water swim event that they have. It's 200 metres from my front door, so if I don't go and do that, I'll never do anything.
I'm currently considering a move that will put me in better proximity to swimming locations, so I understand. I'm like, well...
Yes, well, your Nike Centre where you guys do your swimming and so forth, well, I'm lucky enough to have our swim squads run from what we call the National Aquatic Centre here in Auckland. So we get a 50 metre we get 50 metre lanes. They will be opened back up to us shortly. So it's a really world-class swimming facility. So swimming is easy to do for me, given the fact we have access to that pool. And as I say, geographically, if I was to describe it, out this side, 150 metres is the sea. And so you can easily walk down the end of my street, dive off the rock face, and you're in the water. To this side, there's 150 metres to a freshwater lake, and the external perimeter of the lake, if you swim around it, and say I'm a 50-minute Ironman swimmer in a wetsuit, but if you swim one lap around the outside of the perimeter of that lake, you pretty much go about 55 minutes to 58 minutes, depending on the conditions. So as a swimming options, I'm spoiled for choice.
That's amazing. I'm so jealous.
We're going to come and run a camp at your house.
Oh, yeah.
Do it.
Can we?
Do it. Yeah.
We'll talk later.
We're well positioned.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So we have a question in chat. So Kirby, who's one of our longtime listeners / watchers, she would like to know, she says she believes that you collaborated with Stacey Sims. Is that correct? That she interviewed you as part of her book?
Yeah,
is that right?
I'm very good friend of Stacey. Yeah.
Oh, great. So Kirby would like to know how that information shifted how you coach women.
Okay. So I'm affectionately known behind closed doors as the period whisperer.
Tell us more.
Because
now out of doors.
And it's a lot to do with the fact that I've been very aware of female physiology for a long period of time, and I was very early prepared to discuss it both publicly and privately with athletes from the very outset. And Stacey's actually a long-time friend of mine, which is, in all honesty, to have Stacey as firstly a friend and then a colleague is wonderful, because she was very much a great motivator to continue to explore the conversation in and around female physiology. And then a number of women in this sport that are dealing with some sort of hormonal imbalance is far greater than we'd like to admit. It's sort of one of the things that is still, in some respects, very difficult for females to talk about. And point of fact, not having a period for a lot of women is very convenient. But to me, I've always maintained that when my coaching practice, health is more important than performance, but we can have both. But I will not ignore health at the expense of performance. And so I worked with a lot of females who presented themselves in some sort of hormonal dysfunction, and so I started consulting with Stacey even before her book Raw came out, which is a wonderful resource I thoroughly recommend. In point of fact, I would love to share with you two other things. We're working and collaborating on a menstrual tracking app called Wild AI. And if any of your viewers or listeners, or even the coaching group itself, want to help us push forward the understanding of coaching of female physiology, we have a coaching survey and a female athlete survey that I'd love to share with you guys that we want to glean more information from. But working with Stacey, we talked about the fact that, and this is not, don't get me wrong, the book that says women are not small men that's true, and that's Stacey's book, but actually some women are small men. So there is a spectrum, and some women are more acutely affected by their hormones than others, and you need to then coach the individual rather than giving a blanket assessment across all females. Like in the low hormone phase after bleeding, women are basically men. In and around ovulation, we can have performance decline for some athletes, and also blood plasma changes and hydration status changes and so forth. And then in the mid to late luteal phases, as women are coming into to bleeding again, we can have some real performance declines, and then also through the menstrual period where the bleeding actually occurs, some athletes are really impacted there as well. But then we can have other athletes who just breeze through that no problems at all. So, but you need to know how to apply strategies to help women there. It's not about necessarily saying, and this is something that's happened for a long period of time, you're not built for the sport because of your menstrual cycle. There's plenty of strategies that you can implement to help women lessen the effects of their hormones. But ultimately, my big thing, and why people have always given, they always affectionately refer to me as the period whisperers, because it's interesting. I've managed to negotiate probably half a dozen females back from hormonal dysfunction into a healthy menstrual cycle while still getting better as athletes. And Hannah Wells, I mentioned before, who had won 7 or 8 of the last half Ironmans that we talked about as one of my professionals, she came to me having not had a period for 4 years. And it was ironic. I'd gone to a female health symposium that Stacey had invited me to. She was presenting at, and on the same day, Hannah had also, who lived in the town where the symposium was, had contacted me about coaching and said, could I meet and chat about coaching? So I walked out of this female health symposium, sat down with Hannah for the very first time, and she said, I'd like to talk about coaching. And I said, well, are you having your period? And she just went completely beetroot red. And this is the first person who had actually asked her that outside of her mum, who pretty much knew, but her partner didn't know. She hadn't talked to anyone about it. And that opened up a line of conversation where we decided straight away to say health first and performance second, and we'll work towards getting both of them of equal importance, but we'll address the health first. And performance should align and start to come along with it, but we're not going to continue on ignoring the fact that hormonally your body's not working as it should. So it's been an interesting road, and Hannah podcasted about that. She's been very open about that conversation. And I would actually, this is what still scares me to this day, Hannah would have received over 200 private messages via Instagram from female age group triathletes saying they were in exactly the same position as her, but they can't talk to their coach. The coach is a male coach. He doesn't want to have the conversation, or they're not, dare I say, educated enough to know what to do. And they were looking to Hannah for this magic solution. And it was literally a lot to do with, all we did is we took a lot of the principles out of Stacey's book. We took a lot of feedback from Stacey as to what we needed to do, and we made sure that we put those as at the forefront of our decision making, and we were able to get her period back. It only took probably less than 4 months for that to happen, and she'd been without period for probably 5 years. And the relief from a female to know that she was actually back as a female and also performing as a professional athlete was, that's one of my greatest pleasures as a coach, to make sure someone's healthy and successful at the same time.
That's incredible. And we definitely want to be a part of that. That app, yes.
Yeah. Wild AI, it's in its beta testing phase at the moment, but literally, for those women that are out there, they can connect their Training Peaks calendar to it, and it can currently act as a as a portal for their Training Peaks workouts, and then they can just log their symptoms and their menstrual phases, and they can get a lot of useful information that will help them make good decisions around training.
Amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. We would love to be part of that.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at that place of forthrightness? Being able to sit down with a prospective athlete. I mean, I'm guessing that didn't just occur. Like, but yeah, could you talk about that a little bit?
I've always thought being self-educated as a coach, there's a lot of, I always have looked outside. I've always collaborated with very bright people. I don't see myself necessarily as being one of those, but I've always been able to have intelligent conversations through my own education with intelligent people and people that have been sports scientists, nutritionists, psychologists, or physical therapists, strength and conditioning, whoever I can steal information from in a collaborative way. Mm-hmm. But I've always been such a voracious consumer of endurance, performance knowledge. But it didn't come necessarily straight away. I think you need to have your proof in the pudding, which is, you need to be able to show that you can bake the cake. And I think age group athletes and their success is something that you can get as a coach for sure. But I think it was once I started working with professional athletes, and I think there's a real, not to say that the age group athletes and their success is an easy thing to achieve. It's definitely not. I don't think that there's much difference between the stresses and strains of professional life versus age group amateur life. But I think it was in my success was attracting interest from professional athletes to be coached by me, and then those professional athletes actually ended up getting success as well. Braden Currie, for one, I coached for a number of years, and I know he was an Asia Pacific Ironman champ. He beat Javier Gomez and ran a 2:40 to win that race one day in Cairns, and that was an incredible performance by Braden. And he went on to a top 5 in Kona. And when you start to see athletes perform against the very best athletes in the world, you start to realize you must know a little bit about this. This can't be all luck. And I think I personally needed that validation. I could have gone away to university and done a sports science degree and had the theory, but I thought I had a good feeling for the theory, but I needed to see it play out in real life. And then once those things started to happen, you do build a bit of confidence, and you do actually realize that you can do this, and that the way that you piece these things together proves to be relatively successful. And then it started with Amelia Watkinson. I coached her for a number of years. She just won Ironman Cairns. I don't coach her now. I'm not claiming that victory, but I coached her to start with, and then I coached Braden, and then I've coached a number of other professional athletes. Jocelyn McCauley, she came from QT2 Systems, and we turned her career around, and she broke the course record here at Ironman New Zealand a few years ago. And then Hannah is another one. And then I coach Javier Gomez's wife, Anneke Jenkins, and she was a short course athlete who had 10 years of injury. And we changed things based on what I felt was appropriate, and she went away and won the Spanish half Ironman champs on the weekend, which was an incredible debut performance from her as well. So I think all those things, once you feel that you've been validated in some way, then you get a little bit more confident in your methods, and then you can have more open and honest conversations. And that's what people are looking for. They want someone. Coaches have to be leaders at the end of the day, and so you can't sort of sit on a fence. And ultimately, like as I say, if you build it, they will come. But if you also don't sort of dance around the subject, and you be quite direct, but in a compassionate way, then I think you can have conversations about any aspect of the sport, including, are you getting your period?
Mm-hmm. I'm starting to think this should have been like a 3-part interview because there are so many things that I want to ask you about each one of these topics.
You're never going to get a short answer from me.
No, I love it. This is awesome.
You're a host's dream come true. Though.
Exactly. Everything you say, I'm like, I want to know more about that. But I don't want to not address the podcast, which is something that you put in a lot of effort and time, and a place that you have really poured your expertise for other people to steal. So thank you for that. You have done 335 episodes. Is that correct? That seems amazing.
Pretty much, yeah. So we're about 1 million. I think we've had about over 1,100,000 downloads or something like that in our career. So that was a pretty remarkable feat. And I think Mickey, my co-host, and I, when Chris, my partner, she said, you know that we've had over 1 million downloads? And we're like, oh,
what?
Really? Well, we're just in it. We just do it, and then Chris shares everything to us. Mickey and I are complete fly by the seat of our pants people, and Chris makes it what it is. So everything, I need to get her on to tell you how to make a successful podcast, because the hosts are by no means the ones that make it happen and make it successful. You need a lot of other people helping you.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, though it's a wonderful, wonderful medium. I mean, as you say, I've never been really precious about. I think I am a little bit critical of other coaches. I don't think coaches collaborate enough. Mm-hmm. I think coaches are very precious about their territory, and they get very upset if an athlete leaves, and they think that all their programs are secret, and all this, all the workouts are secret, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, it ain't that secret. It's pretty simple to a certain degree, but it's the nuances that matter. And I've never been. I think why I became a coach is that I like to talk about the sport, and I didn't want to just talk to my athletes about the sport. I was more than happy to talk to an audience about the sport, and look, as a medium, I've learned so much from podcasts. I would say that is my 95% of my coaching education has come from a podcast that's led me to a rabbit hole that I've gone down and researched. And if it wasn't for podcasts, I don't think my business would be as successful as it is, or as far-reaching as what it is. So, but we did realize, we look at podcasts now and we see how many are cropping up, and the life expectancy of those shows is probably 3 to 6 months, because the work that goes into those shows, and when you're only getting 150 listeners, it's just not worth continuing on with that show. So we got in early, and I think we were one of the early adopters of the medium. But we set our stall out, and this is, again, by no means me, much more Chris. She said, if we're going to do this, we are going to do it to the best of our ability. So when she edits the audio content, she will take out, and I'm going to give away a secret here, every single pregnant pause, every single and every single repetitive statement that I make all the time. She cleans these things up so it looks like I've read from a script, whereas I'm actually just trying to read from a scientific paper and trying to make my way through all the scientific literature. And Chris just cleans that all up. And so without that, we committed to the highest level of audio quality, the highest level of editing. We want the content to be highly varied. We want multiple voices on the show as well, so it's not just one person boring someone to tears. Because if it was just me, as you can see, once you set me off, I'm hard to stop. But we had all these things, and it just evolved over time. And we would probably put 10 hours of our week in total to creating this podcast, which not many people can afford when they're trying to do coaching as well. So it's a 3-person job, but it's probably the only reason why we've managed to get our heads above the parapet so more people can hear about us, more people can, look to us for nutrition advice or coaching or whatever it may be. So, and it's thoroughly enjoyable, like I just talking triathlon to triathletes and not having them being able to respond to you is fantastic.
Like any good parent, you're gonna have some favorites. Are there a few episodes that really stand out in your memory as ones that are important to you?
Yeah, there was, and it's because I did my first triathlon when I was 50 years old. I would have done it when I was maybe 15 or 16. And it was never my number one sport, but because I love to keep fit, it was always I used to do the training to keep fit for playing soccer or cricket or tennis or whatever it was. But the fact that I now talk to and have interviewed nearly every single one of my boyhood favourites and stars, that when I think of it, I used to just read about these people in magazines. And to then eventually either be on a Skype call with them or anything like that was just, that's, for any fanboy, that's just wonderful. But for me, I would say that my favourite ever interview that I ever did was with Hamish Carter, the Kiwi athlete who won the Athens Olympics. Because for me, as a New Zealander, I watched that race, and I remember the whole nation watched that race as Bevan McKinnon and Hamish Carter went toe-to-toe to win it in Athens. And I actually sat down face-to-face with Hamish and recorded it in person. And he said to me at the time, he said, "You know more about me than I know about myself." and I think it was just the enthusiasm for his career and everything that came across. And a lot of people commented on how much they enjoyed the interview, and I think it was a lot to do with the fact that it was from someone who was genuinely passionate about his career, and as I say, I didn't even prepare for the interview. I knew everything about his career from start to finish. That we just sat down and we just started talking, and we just had just a really good conversation. And so that one really does stand out for me.
Just reading out of your diary, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's a sad thing to say, but Hamish is just one of many that I could probably sit down with and I wouldn't have to do a lot of research on.
Awesome.
Hamish Carter, this is your life.
Yeah, pretty much. I think he felt a bit awkward. He was like, geez, how do you know that?
We've definitely freaked out our share of guests, I think. So tell us about the early days when you guys got started. Obviously, this is asking for a friend, but how did you and Mickey figure out what your roles were in the podcast and like what your process was for all of that?
You really need to find the right co-host. You really, really have to find the right co-host. And that doesn't happen easily because it's not like an audition process that you go through. I would suggest that it's more luck than design for sure. Mickey and I have been friends for years. We're super passionate about endurance and nutrition. And the thing about Mickey is that she is just the perfect sidekick for me. She is both wildly intelligent, but equally so a complete airhead. And so basically, her faux pas on the podcast have us rolling in the aisles when she gets something right or wrong, and we call them Mickeyisms because she just she'll go off on a tangent. So that was more luck because I've listened to many podcasts and the single person voice with the interviews is okay, but when you can have two people sparring off at each other and two people that are essentially, Mickey's not a triathlete. But she loves endurance sports. She knows triathlon. She loves her nutrition. Loves it. So that was. We knew that we would just. We'd done a lot of presentations together. So we'd done a lot of talks and seminars and stuff like that. And we just had this really good way of just yin yang someone serves, the other one returns, and that kind of thing happening. So we didn't really think too much about it. We knew we wanted segments. We knew that I would do most of the interviewing for those because they'd typically be triathletes, and really it was just about trying to be relaxed enough and organic enough just to find that people were listening into a conversation. Because the thing that we said to each other is, we said, what happens in the middle of a bike ride when they get to the coffee shop? What's the kind of chit chat that goes on there? That's what we're going to do. And so that's literally what we're going to do. But the funny thing is, we'll just have all these excerpts and segments coming in, and you and I will just coffee shop it in between that. And that's sort of really the length and breadth of how much planning went into it.
That's awesome.
So not a ton of planning in that stage, but as you just talked about, it takes a lot of work each week. And as you know, like hitting that level of apparent ease is really difficult. Could you just take us on a walkthrough of like the process of building a show?
Okay, so it's changed a little bit in the sense that what we'll do is now that we're 333 shows in, we committed to having a professional interview in every single show we've ever done, and there's not many more than 333 long distance or short course pros going around that have got enough profile to warrant an interview. So we ended up sort of getting through that. So we've double backed a lot with our favourite pros. So we'll decide on who is our feature interview, and that can be a professional, anyone that's got something relevant in terms of training information that centres around, of benefit to the listener. Mickey's her roles is it's 80% of the podcast is decided by me. Mickey has her segment, and let me tell you, she probably decides 5 minutes before the podcast as to what that is. And Chris's editing skills make it sound like it was a coherent, well-prepared segment, which we're in debate about improving on at the moment, so that's part of it. So Mickey's role is to come ahead with what we call a one step ahead segment, where she will talk about one aspect of nutrition. I would have recorded a feature interview with someone. Sometimes we do them well in advance, sometimes they literally happen in the week. Like yesterday, Callum Millwood, a Kiwi athlete, has just announced his retirement. He's got a very successful age group team called the Cupcake Cartel. So we did an interview with him yesterday. So we generally reach out to that person a week in advance and secure the time that we're going to interview them. I will have decided on what we call a workout of the week, where I talk about some sort of training topic. And then I would have created what we call a run sheet with bullet points for the key messages that we need to get across within that particular segment, and then I forward that on to Mickey so that she is across the general gist of what I'm going to talk about. And if there's anything she's not familiar with, she'll ask me so that she can ask intelligent questions. So she gets that advanced ahead of our actual recording, and then the same should happen with her one step ahead, but she never gets that to me on time, so I've just got to make it up as I go along with intelligent questions. But then once we've prepared the run sheets for all the segments, we get together generally on a Thursday or Friday morning. We record the podcast proper, and then once we give Chris the raw audio and the main interview and any other extraneous bits, she'll then sit down and spend probably, I would say, 6 to 8 hours on the editing process. Not every podcast would go to that length, but when you're trying to bring in pre-recorded interviews and get the sequencing of that right, plus the editing of that and the editing of our content as well, it probably takes about that long. And then that's generally finished by about a Sunday, and then the time stamping the show notes so that people can then go to a PDF form and go, look, I don't want to listen to Bevan Rabbit on for so long. I just want to go to the workout of the week, the hot property interview, and something else. And so that takes a little bit of time for Chris to create all those notes, and then we put the show notes and the links to any websites or scientific articles or whatever we do in the show notes as well. And then first thing Monday morning, Chris uploads that to Libsyn, which is our hosting platform, and next minute it goes out to the world.
And how in the world do you have time outside of that to run a coaching business?
And train for 12 hours a week in the gym.
50, yeah, true. Well, yeah, exactly. This is the big difference. Like, we're lucky. Our kids are not at home anymore. We're in a position where we can dedicate 7 days of our working week. We don't have young kids. We've got our athletes. We do a heck of a lot. We have a very close professional and working relationship with our athletes. We do a lot with them. They come and stay at our house. We go and stay at theirs. It's very much a family affair in terms of the domestic New Zealand athletes. So we interact a lot with them. But because we literally have 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to get this job done, for someone who's not particularly organised, I make the most of those 7 days and those 24 hours.
Very cool.
You're saying we can never sleep again.
No,
we don't sleep much already.
You could learn to streamline it a bit better. I think the problem for us is that it became bigger and bigger as it went along, and our podcast very rarely, very frequently, I should say, is around about 2 hours. Plus or minus. Our podcast doesn't have to be that long. But when we start to fill it with more and more content, and I think it also separates us from other podcasts because it's very varied. It touches on a number of different subjects. That's a pretty big undertaking when it starts to get to that duration. And I think that brings associated time. I regularly will end up talking to a pro for an hour, and that will go into the middle of what is an hour podcast anyway. So, shorten it up. If you're taking notes, either shorten it up or find someone that can do the editing, and then your job's a lot easier.
We speaking of time, we got to wrap up soon-ish here, so we can actually let you go about your day. But one thing that I think we'd love to hear about is that 848 Ironman New Zealand. And
also asking for a friend.
Right, exactly. When you ask questions like this, you're sort of like, oh, like I asked you a question that's like, you did an 848 when you were 45. Like, what went into that? And it's just like, well, but I think going that fast requires a real consistency and focus. And just also, I'd be interested to hear your preparation for that event and your execution. Kind of what went into that performance.
Probably about 15 years of consistent training. and literally, and it's funny, and I'll tell you the story. The thing that gave me a competitive advantage by not being a radically talented athlete, and I'm not saying I was a bad athlete, I had a good enough VO2, metabolically I was fine, but I never gave up on learning how to continue to get better and not getting stuck in one place, and accepting that age was the limiting factor, because a lot of people do believe that as we get older, we're going to get necessarily slower. And yes, that will happen, but I honestly believe that should you continue to, as an age group athlete, explore the best way to recover from your training, then you continue to get better. And also to monitor progress. because the key is that a lot of athletes will just tick the box that they did the workout and assume they've got better from it. Okay, because I remember when I first decided to take full distance racing seriously, that I qualified for Kona, and I decided to go. And the guy, a local guy that I sort of had raced a little bit, he qualified as well, but he qualified in front of me. And we went to Kona, and then I beat him by one place. Like, I came across the line and he came across next. And that was the start of my age group career. And he's a local coach as well. But when I left off age group racing, it was probably about 8 years later from where that race actually occurred, I was probably at that point in my career 45 minutes faster than him. And he was no different. He just produced the same result year in and year out. So I think the key here is, as long as your lean muscle mass is not being lost and you're maintaining lean muscle mass and the function of that lean muscle mass, then you can continue to get better right into the mid-40s and even later than that, if you make sure that you apply the appropriate stress, you stay away from illness and injury, but you recover from that stress, which is the key. And I think my innate skills was the love of the process. And I remember I spent my entire age group career training on my own. Like, the one thing I could do is, I swam on my own. I literally coached a swim squad, our swim squad, and so I coached it on the side of the pool. After that swim squad finished, I jumped in, swam on my own. So I would bike on my own, I would run on my own. I never needed the stimulus of other people. Not that I don't enjoy group training, it's just that when you're one of us new real world coaches, you're working from home, you don't work a 9 to 5, so you can fit your training in at different times of the day. So the love of the process was the key, and just bringing an awareness of sports science and data to help me understand how to make progress. And I self-coached myself for a number of years. In point of fact, not for the qualifying time, the 8:40. Dan Plews, who is the current age group world record holder in Kona. Dan and I are good mates, and I helped Dan with a little bit of advice for his Kona record, and he helped me with a program for the 8:48 and also the Kona race. And it's just being sensible, and it's just applying stress. I mean, overload is overload. If you apply it, you recover from it, and nutritionally you support it, you should adapt to it. And so the message for anyone out there is track your progress, apply stress, recover from it, and you should get better. And if you're not, then dig a bit deeper as to why. And it may not be the workout, and it may not be the stress that you've applied, it might be the stress that's inhibiting your recovery. But you have to work out what's happening. But just don't go ahead, head down, bum up, and spend 6 months doing the same thing, and then working out 6 months later, you have not progressed at all. And if you do that, then you can avoid long periods of stagnation and long periods of plateau, or even periods of detraining and going backwards, which I know a lot of people do. Because my big thing is, I would have retired from the sport if I went 12 months and produced the same result at the next New Zealand Ironman. If I couldn't see some form of improvement, and I know this happens all the time, we all have our regular Ironman that we go back to each year, and as we get a bit older, we pretty much train for 12 months and we produce exactly the same result, if not sometimes worse, but we then go and do exactly the same thing again 12 months later. That's the definition of insanity. Don't do that. You're making training mistakes. You're not actually progressing. So I think being able to look at it as a coach and as an athlete actually helped me continue to improve. And I'm hugely proud of that result. Like, I mean, 8:48, when I went to Kona after that race, and this is going to sound arrogant, I knew I was going to win. I mean, I was 45 years of age. I'd looked around every single qualifying race around the world, and if I didn't cock up Kona and I didn't go too hard, no other 45-year-old would have gone 8:48 because New Zealand's not a fast race. So I was like, I'm a good chance here. I'm a really good chance here. So when you know what you're capable of, I think then, and you can extract that from yourself on race day, that's when you obviously get the best performance as well. So the training's one thing, pacing and strategy on the race day is another, and if you get all those things working together for you, you're always going to get your best performance. So I've probably made coaching and racing sound simple, but at times it is, but a lot of people don't quite get it.
There's a lot of hay to be made in making it complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do love hay.
Yes, there is actually. There is, but it is all about stress and recovery.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm already thinking of questions for volume 2 of this interview, Bevan, when that happens in the near future. And we already have questions from chat about who wins between you and the Blues in peak conditioning.
Actually, that's a really good one. Like the Blues we swim very much the same. In our heyday, I was a better cyclist, but he's a fantastic runner. And I would, that's when I'll call an age gap. He's 15 years younger than me, he should beat me. Yeah. But for some reason, I was always a lot of people's targets for a long period of time because I continually won the age group overall race here in New Zealand, and people were going, he's so old. Somebody's got to beat him. Somebody's got to beat him. And the Blues would even say, I remember the Blues came up to me and introduced himself at a race. And then his offside, Paul Lawson, who's a wonderful sports scientist and coach in his own right, he said the Blues just wanted to come and get to know you. He wanted to know what you looked like. He wanted to find out a little bit more about you.
Stick a mark on you.
You should be looking at people in your own age group. Don't come and look at me. But then again, he would beat me 8 times out of 10, I'd say.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for coming tonight and telling us all of your stories. I really can't wait to talk to you again. This was also so interesting, and Chris and I both love talking to you. So thank you for making some time in your tomorrow for our today.
My pleasure. Wonderful catching up with you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Awesome. We got through, I think, a third of the questions that we had. So
yeah.
We got more just because we were going off script because everything you were saying.
Like, tell us more.
Everybody just got us interested in different directions.
Yeah, look, I'm more than happy to talk about inside testing and anything else from a coaching perspective. Just reach out whenever you want to catch up on that because there's some fascinating stuff there, and if you guys are using that platform, I couldn't recommend it more highly in the sense of understanding your metabolism and being able to access that as an online coaching organisation is hugely beneficial. And as I mentioned before, knowing what you need to do to make yourself better. I can't, if your listeners are out there that have been coached by you guys, make sure that you sign up for an inside test and find out, what is your metabolic fitness, what is your physiological fitness, because that's where the program starts.
Thank you for that. We are absolutely in total agreement, and you will be hearing from us about both Inside and the Tracker app. And all things coaching related, and I just want you to help me get huge. So I'm gonna reach out to you about that too. But yeah, thank you again, and for everybody who's joining us out there today, make sure you come back 6:30 a.m. PDT for yoga with Amy BT tomorrow morning, and 6:30 a.m. on Thursday for our Zwift group ride. Bevan, thank you again. This has been probably one of our favorite interviews of all time.
You're one of our favorite children now.
It is. Brilliant. You are. It's true. Thanks for coming, guys. See you soon.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.